people can kind of trickle in as they come. So hello, everybody, and you're all very welcome. My name is Elizabeth Moen, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the director of Festival na Bhean, and we're absolutely delighted that you joined us for today's discussion about bringing the arts into healthcare settings. This conversation will be focused on experiences drawn from a recent vital signs tour, but we're hoping and expecting that many of the insights and learnings that we've gathered will prove useful on a broader scale. There will be an opportunity to ask questions of our panelists at the end of the session, so please do feel free to utilize the Q&A function or drop questions into the chat, and we'll pick some up towards the end if time allows. And to give you a brief overview of who we are and what we do, Festival na Bhean was set up by Gemma Tipton, who you may know from the Irish Times, during the worst of lockdowns in 2020. Initially, our goal was to provide employment to artists and theatre professionals during the pandemic, while simultaneously bringing safe live performance to people who needed that connection and magic the most. But as Ireland has evolved into a new phase of how we live with COVID, Festival na Bhean has found that our new mission, our real mission, lies largely in democratizing access to the arts and visiting audiences that can sometimes feel marginalized or excluded. What makes our approach so special is that we go to communities wherever they're gathered, and we meet them wherever they're at. And in doing this, we want to say to people that they're important. We create opportunities for our audiences to meet, to talk, to laugh, to perform, and sing together, to feel connected to and proud of who they are and where they're from, to see themselves, their neighbors, and their caretakers in a new light. This is very much at the heart of what we hope to and what I believe we did accomplish with the Vital Signs Tour, which took place mostly throughout August 2023, with what ended up being 24 stops in 9 counties, featuring 26 artists who performed for a cumulative total of 650 people. This tour was accompanied by a number of free writing workshops across the country, as well as poetry SOS clinics, which might more accurately be described as poetry therapy. These are the cold hard stats behind the tour, but what I'm sure our panelists will echo as being most moving and impactful was that impossible to quantify individual experience, which we will nonetheless be attempting to capture over the next hour. And I do just want to acknowledge that while we endeavor to cover a spectrum of experiences with this panel, we are missing the direct voice of the audiences that we visited. This is largely due to ethical considerations, but we think it's important to make that note and to say that we'll be relying on our panelists to channel that experience to the best of their abilities. We'll be guided by our host, Martin Dyar, who was the curator and MC for this tour, which emerged from the anthology he edited with Poetry Ireland of the same name. Festival na Bhean was thrilled to partner with Poetry Ireland on this tour, which could not have happened without their support. This tour was funded by the Arts Council, for which we're incredibly grateful. We also worked with the support of Louth County Council, Dublin City Council, Waterford City and County Council, Monaghan County Council, Cavan County Council, Roscommon County Council, and Mental Health Ireland. And just to say a huge thank you as well to our indefatigable project manager, Anne Hendrick, who will be saying a few words at the close of the seminar, but who made wearing 19 hats throughout the course of the tour somehow seem stylish and effortless, as well as our crew, Benny Lynch and Vincent Doherty, who made every staff member, every artist, and every audience member feel at ease and comfortable at every stop, while simultaneously ensuring that everything tech-wise went off without a hitch. I'm keeping my introduction relatively brief, as I'm going to leave it mostly to our poet, who will speak far more eloquently about the tour than I will. But just to say in terms of a format, first we'll be hearing from Martin Dyar, who will be giving us a rundown of Vital Signs, the book, and the tour, and then we'll be hearing from Ger Walsh of Mental Health Ireland, and the artists Emer Mayock and Enda Wyley, followed by a conversation amongst all 4 panelists. There will be a few minutes for a Q&A if there are any questions, and will be drawn to a close by my colleague Anne Hendrick. We'll do our best with keeping strictly to the hour, as I'm conscious some people might be joining us during their lunch. So now I'll hand you over to Martin Dyar, a highly accomplished Mayo-born poet whose first collection, Maiden Names, was shortlisted for the Pigott Prize. His new collection, The Meek, is forthcoming in early 2024, so definitely keep an eye out for that. So over to you now, Martin.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth, and hello, everybody. It's great to be with you, and it's great to have this opportunity to reflect on what was a truly wonderful experience, the Vital Signs Tour in August, and to have an opportunity to discuss the tour with some of its supporters and contributors. And indeed, it's wonderful to be in the Festival in Navan zone again. They really are a tremendously impressive organization. And we'll be saying I'll be saying a little bit more, I guess, about what it was like to work with Festival in Navan. But I'll begin by saying, firstly, actually, I'll begin by saying thank you to Festival in Navan, and to the Arts Council, and to Poetry Ireland, and to everyone who supported the tour for the experience. It was truly memorable, and that question that Elizabeth raised there, that idea of something impossible to quantify, I'm keen to try and pursue that. I'm keen to try and put words on it a little bit. I'll start at the beginning, I guess. I am, as Elizabeth mentioned, the editor of an anthology called Vital Signs, Poems of Illness and Healing, which was published by Poetry Ireland just last year. And that book was commissioned in 2019. So it had, I guess, the unique challenge of being a project that had to come to fruition through the pandemic. But Poetry Ireland were a tremendous publisher, and their hope and their ambition for the project was ultimately vindicated in the book coming to fruition. In terms of how it started, I guess my own background as a medical educator, my poetry life has led me into medical education, and I've been teaching medical students for many years in the School of Medicine in Trinity. So that gives me, I suppose, it gave me a set of perspectives and a certain vocabulary, but also a keen sense of how the arts find one particular avenue into healthcare, and ultimately into the realm of the patient, albeit that I'm particularly concerned with the realm of the medical student and the realm of the young doctor. So as I say, I had a certain vocabulary, a certain enthusiasm, which over the years has been part of a dialogue with medical students. I also had a sense, I guess I probably had about a handful of poems that I knew were very special, that they fulfilled that criterion for good poetry from the poet Wallace Stevens, insofar as they seem to be inexhaustible to meditation. You could keep returning to these poems, and you would find that you had plenty more to say. And so I suppose once there was an opportunity to have a conversation about the book being commissioned, I quickly realized that there was like-mindedness between myself and Poetry Ireland at that time. They themselves, in their industriousness, in their dedication to events in particular, had begun to discover that if you put a doctor and their patient, for example, into a room and get them to talk about that relationship, but get them to do it through the medium of creative writing and through poetry in particular, something very special can take place. I also recall a little bit fantastically that there was a horse poem at the beginning of our conversation, a horse poem that had a veterinary context that led to a great discussion at a Poetry Ireland event there in number 11 in Parnell Square. And from that, the idea of the possibility of the book emerged. But there was quite a long road, and in many ways my academic experience wasn't going to be much use to me. I had to come back more into the role of the poet, into the poetry editor, and go searching for poems. I guess we had one question in mind: what have poets had to say about illness and healthcare? And if we can gather together 100 or so poems, can we find poems that are all good enough to be gathered into an anthology? Can it stand up as a book of poems? And at the same time, is there enough diversity there in terms of subject matter to make it an authentic exploration of the human experience of illness and healing? We concluded that we could fulfill both of those aspirations in terms of quality and in terms of the variety of the book. To give you a brief flavor, the first poem in the book is The Hospital by Patrick Cavan, a masterful sonnet, which comes from I suppose, an autobiographical perspective. And Kavanagh's time in on the grounds of St. James's, indeed, back in the mid-1950s. And he builds towards a philosophy of resilience. Begins very playfully saying that he fell in love with the functional ward of a chest hospital. It kind of cracks a joke for the reader and takes us on a journey from that point, beginning quite conversationally into something quite profound and extremely beautiful, in the form of, as I say, a philosophy of resilience and a philosophy of illness. And that poem, I think, functions as a suitable gateway into the book itself. One of our concerns, part of the editorial conversation along the way, was along the lines of, can a book of this kind be attractive? Can it be compelling? Will it be ultimately depressing? Some of the subject matter is, by definition, challenging. And what we found, and what I think the book manifests, is that the best poems about illness and healing seek to resist despair. And that's one of the things that defines Vital Signs as a book. It presents a refusal of despair. The very last poem in the book is called After a Dumnam, by the poet Tom French. And as it happens, that's a horse poem. And in the story of that poem, a horse has its heart broken when it realizes that it's going to be separated from its human friend. And Tom French uses that story, uses that legend, as a way of meditating on the nature of grief and how people cope in difficult circumstances. And of course, you can't explore hospitals, you can't explore healthcare environments without coming upon the idea of grief. But what we found is that it's generally hand in hand with a consideration of courage too. I suppose that idea of a refusal of despair is central to the poems in Vital Signs. The other thing to say is that the subject matter is important, and the poets have considered very bravely and very closely aspects of illness and healing, but they've also taken the language just as seriously. And I suppose from the editorial perspective, that was one of the things that I was looking for, in terms of the quality, but also the relevance of the subject matter. But in another sense, that's the kind of dimension that balances the poems and helps them, I think, to transcend maybe the darker elements in some of the subject matter. The other thing that's interesting about the Vital Signs poems, and maybe I've given you a flavor of it there, Patrick Cavan as a patient falling in love with the hospital, Tom French thinking about grief, but looking at this, pondering this legendary image, this dialogue between a horse and its master. The poets have been very curious to look at illness in quite broad context, and to see the humanity of the experience, to look into the relationships that are at play. In some cases, if they're talking about illness, they're talking about diagnosis or talking about recovery, they'll depart entirely from the clinical setting. And they do that in very interesting ways. Anne-Marie Curran's poem Bog Medicine is an interesting example of the kind. She pretends to be a doctor herself, turns herself into a kind of a pagan authority on a mountain, dispensing remedies. And the poets do put themselves in the shoes of the doctors. They're interested to write about healthcare professionals, but many poets are interested somehow to displace them and to use poetry itself as a kind of a healing mechanism. To say a little bit about my experience of working at a festival in Cavan and the Vital Signs tour, as I've said, it was a truly wonderful experience. We visited 7 counties, and we met wonderful people along the way. I think one of the things that I found myself marveling at really is the way that Festival in Cavan cope with the built-in challenges of the work. They have significant work to do in terms of the logistics So there is, I suppose, first and foremost, how are you going to get around the country? How are you going to manifest a theatre experience? How are you going to manifest a performance space that will exist, that will be compelling, that will have the right aesthetic and the right sound and all of that kind of thing? That takes a great deal of figuring out. And the two technicians, Benny and Vincent, who were mentioned at the beginning, are extraordinary, I think, pioneers in this field of delivering the arts to healthcare settings. Their theatrical skill, their technical know-how causes the stage to be manifested wonderfully in every setting. And in many cases, it struck me that the staging itself was part of the presentation. Music and poetry were central to the tour, but the stage itself as a spectacle, as something that in many cases the patients and the residents, service users, clients, and staff members were observing appearing before their very eyes, sometimes indoors, but more often outside the various facilities. Great spectacle, and the dynamic between the technicians and the Festival in the Van core staff in Dublin is a special one. There's a great deal of trust and a great deal of commitment on both sides. There's the logistic question, I suppose, of the relationships between Festival in the Van and all of their partners around the country. These are not conventional venues, and so you need access. You need to be able to communicate with like-minded people, find like-minded people and communicate with them and establish trust. And that is something that Festival in the Van do, I think, with great humanity and with a kind of relentlessness for the sake of their ideals. And it was tremendous to be part of that. I found myself as the curator attending all of the events and meeting new people and supporting the artists, buoyed up by that, buoyed up by the fruit of all of that logistic and administrative commitment behind the scenes. Those relationships are vital relationships in themselves. And as I've said, there's a like-mindedness there that makes it possible to, as it were, parachute the art or the entertainment and all of its associated benefits into these settings. There's also, I suppose, logistically speaking, the relationships. We have staff on the ground, you have partners at a county level, you'd have arts programmers sometimes within healthcare environments, and there's just a constant conversation. And then ultimately a very memorable sense of satisfaction when things go well, as they did at every performance that we delivered during the tour in August. I would say that the other kind of, I suppose, dimension of the logistics is the relationship with the artists themselves. And I suppose I would be one example as a poet and as an editor who brought into the fold an opportunity to do a couple of short tours with Festival in the Van last year, so that I had a sense of what it was about. And then when Festival in the Van were so forthcoming with support for the Vital Signs anthology and with this concept, it was, as we say, a no-brainer, but it was a new venture at a more intense level. And it was just, it was the sense of trust and the sense of fellowship between myself and the Festival in the Van staff was always very, very strong. And that in turn allowed me to represent Vital Signs, to have my, as it were, my public dialogue with the artists themselves, to facilitate them, to be their compere, and indeed to be a de facto Festival in the Van staff member in a kind of interface with the staff and indeed with the patients and the clients themselves. And that, as I say, very dynamically relates to the hard work and to the insight that the Festival in the Van core team do themselves. I have something. I've lots of things that I would like to say about what I observed in terms of the poets and the musicians themselves during the tour, how they approached it, the differences between them if they had experience or not previously, and I guess what was ultimately a joyful experience, seeing them rise to the novelty of these performances, to inescapably some kind of quiet element of poignancy in these performances as well. You have to imagine a sense of a distance between the layperson, the artist, and the person who's resident in the clinical setting. And then you have to imagine that distance being bridged by performance, by the raised voice, by poetry itself, by melody, by music. And that leads to an authentic sense of communication, an authentic sense of audience and performer. And then it ultimately leads to a sense of partnership and of gratitude going both ways. And I suppose one of the great privileges and one of the most memorable aspects of the tour was fielding that sense of satisfaction on both sides, most particularly perhaps with respect to the artists that we had brought on board, to the poets and musicians. But I want to say more, but I want to also learn a little bit more about the essence of that experience, of what it means to be a Vital Signs partner, a Vital Signs tour contributor. And that's one of the opportunities that we have this afternoon, to hear a little bit from some people who have, in many ways, broader understanding and deeper insight than myself. We have 3 guests. And they're going to speak to us for about 5 minutes each, and they're going to reflect a little bit on their experience of the tour, on the broader project, on their experience of working with Festival in Cavan, in a sense separately from their sense of the Vital Signs anthology. They're also going to share with us a little bit of their sense of what is involved, again, as a sort of a field of endeavor in this convergence between the arts and healthcare. They're 3 individuals with a particular insight in that respect, and for that reason, we're very grateful that they're joining us. As I say, they're each going to speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll have some open discussion between myself and our three guests. And indeed, then we'll have some open questions from yourselves, from our audience. And towards that, please feel free to pop any comments or questions into the chat. I'll keep an eye on that, and we'll be delighted to incorporate your views or your queries towards the end of this session. I'll introduce our 3 guests briefly before we hear from them, and then we'll hear from them in sequence. Firstly, we'll hear from Ger Walsh. Ger was a key partner for the Festival in Cavan Vital Signs tour in Longford and Westmeath in August. She was by our side and opening doors in Athlone and in Longford town. And on that day, we did 3 performances, and the poet was Mary Melvin Gagan, and the musicians were Josephine Dolan and Martin Gray. Now, based in Longford, Ger Walsh works in a combined role between Mental Health Ireland and the Health Service Executive, in the area of community integration. And this is an area that seeks to empower clients to reintegrate, to connect to their community. Ger also works in recovery education in mental health. And we also have with us today, and our second speaker will be the distinguished poet Enda Wyley, who has been collaborating with Festival in Cavan for some time. Enda's poem Through the Window is in fact included in the Vital Signs anthology. And as part of the Vital Signs tour, she was conducting one-to-one sessions in healthcare environments, which was for Enda an evolution of a previous Poetry Ireland project. Enda has, in this work, engaged very deeply with the Vital Signs anthology itself and discovered some very interesting things about what a poet potentially brings to the table in this kind of work. Enda Wyley was born in Dublin, and she is a poet, as I've said, and a teacher. She's a member of Ace Donna, the national body which recognises outstanding contributions to the arts in Ireland. Enda has published 6 collections of poetry, most recently The Painter on His Bike with Daedalus Press. Enda has held many residencies, including at the Coombe Maternity Hospital. She has been a poetry therapist for Poetry Ireland, and indeed as part of the Vital Signs Festival in Cavan tour this year. Finally, we'll hear from Emer Mayock. Emer Mayock is an acclaimed multi-instrumentalist musician and composer from County Mayo. Emer has mastered the fiddle, the uilleann pipes, and the flute, which you would consider her main instrument. She is a prolific recording artist and collaborator, and she has toured the world with her music over the past couple of decades. An early member of the band Afro-Celt Sound System, Emer played on their Grammy-nominated album, Volume 3. During the Vital Signs tour in August, Emer partnered with the bouzouki player Donal Siggins and the poet Terry McDonough for a series of hugely memorable performances across County Roscommon. So it's a great pleasure to ask, first of all, Ger Walsh to speak to us.
Hi, Martin. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And hello, everybody. And it's a great pleasure for me to join you today and to share my experience of this wonderful initiative. So as Martin has said, I work with a combined post in the HSE CH08, Longford, Westmeath, and Mental Health Ireland is my employer. And I suppose my work, very briefly, is about recovery. And Martin mentioned the clinical setting, and we can have a clinical recovery in mental health. And I suppose we can also have a personal recovery. And that's the focus of my work. I work with clients who have an enduring mental health challenge. And I suppose, what does that mean? That means that a person can have a major psychiatric disorder diagnosis. And that person has to manage the signs and symptoms of that illness. They have to manage that diagnosis every day of their lives. But they also might have to manage the misinterpretation and the misunderstanding that goes along with a major diagnosis in mental health. And often that can exclude the person from their community. So my work is to sit down with the client and ask them, what would they like to link into in their community? And invariably, it comes around to music and to poetry. So that led me to Festival in a Van. I contacted the arts officer in Mullingar, and she introduced me to Anne Hendrick in Festival in a Van. And of course, it was COVID times. My work is about community integration, and we all know that our communities effectively closed down at that time. So this was an amazing initiative when Anne explained to me about what Festival in a Van is. So that's how I got to know Festival in a Van. And why is it the right fit for the mental health services? Well, I suppose I got a lovely gift in the post of the book, Vital Signs, and President Michael D. Higgins, in his foreword, I think he talks about a shared space. And to me, that's the essence of what this whole experience has been for us all in mental health services. It's a shared space, and Festival in a Van has offered a one-to-one experience to the client. So Anne would have left no stone unturned. The client was asked about their choice. They were asked about their personal choice, which helps empower the person to make that choice and helps with self-determination. Each person was asked, what's your favorite music? What's your favorite poetry? Then that was carried on, and the person was introduced to the local poet and to the local musician in their own community. And that brought a complete sense of community integration. My vivid memories of Festival in a Van. A funny story, we were on site and I picked up completely wrongly that Finbar Fury was in the building. So I ran into the building and I said, Finbar Fury is in the building. And I emptied that building in a matter of minutes. And everybody came out to hear Festival in a Van. And of course, it wasn't Finbar Fury, but it was Finn Fury. And I'm very proud that I emptied it that day. And what an amazing young man he was. The other vivid memory was we were in Athlone, and because of COVID, one of our clients had difficulty with leaving the house through agoraphobia and social anxiety. That person came down from their room and accessed Festival in a Van because Festival in a Van came to them. That was a profound moment for me with the experience of Festival in a Van. Both Elizabeth and Martin has mentioned Benny and Vincent. So that is the essence of Festival in a Van. It was a completely whole experience. We were all transported away and being present to maybe a memory of sometime when we went to a concert. So from the moment I met Benny and Vincent, I was transported, and everyone along with me, all the clients, service users, staff, we were transported to our favorite concert, setting up the gear, the bunting, meeting the musicians, meeting the poets, meeting Martin, the curator, then getting out and dancing, then listening to the poetry. We were just transported away from whatever was going on in our lives in that beautiful moment. Festival in a Van has had a very, very positive impact. The clients have said it's like a vent and there's a release. You take notice when you're present in music. It's mindful. It helps connect. It gives hope. It gives the person identity. It gives meaning. And all of this leads to empowerment. And Festival in the Van have given that one-to-one experience. And I'm just going to finish with, again, the beautiful book that I was given. Martin speaks about the hopeful and the quality that poetry is in that it's healing mechanism. The guiding principle of mental health services is dignity. And when Martin speaks about the healing possibility of poetry and music, poetry, he speaks about the concept of dignity. It's our guiding principle, the dignity of the person. Festival in a Van promoted the dignity of the person. They gave the person choice. They gave them self-determination. They gave them empowerment. And it has been the most wonderful opportunity for me to meet new people and for everyone I represent to meet new people. And Anne Hendrick left no stone unturned with the mental health services. And the compassion and the awareness that we have received, I cannot thank you enough.
Thanks so much, Ger. That's really wonderful, hugely engaging.
Thank you.
And looking forward to hearing more of your thoughts a little bit later and to asking you some questions. Can I ask next Enda to give us a sense of her perspective on Festival in a Van and vital signs? Thank you, Enda.
Hello there, everybody. Thank you to Martin. It was lovely to hear Ger's words as well there. I heard the word joy, and for me, it was a real joy, I have to say, to be a vital signs contributor in the book, the wonderful book that Martin was talking about. To have a poem in it was a great joy, but also into the community and to share the joy of this book and my love of poetry. I'm very passionate about poetry. I love that spine tingling moment when you encounter a poem for the first time, and that's a lot of what I do when I do one-to-one sessions as a poetry therapist. People who come in to see me, they encounter a poem for the first time, and it's wonderful to see them open up and to share their ideas and their experiences about the poems. But when I first started in Festival in a Van, it was Gemma Tipton and Anne Hendrick who actually got in touch with me, and they asked me would I go to a national school in Dublin 8, St. Catherine's there, and that the van would be there. So I've also I've two hats. I'm also a teacher. I have worked for over 20 years down in Sean McDermott Street as a primary school teacher there. So, and during my time as a teacher there, I really loved bringing the arts into disadvantaged communities and into the school setting. So it was a huge joy again for me to go into the school. And Martin has mentioned the beauty of the van. It really is a spectacle. It's a wonderful thing to behold. And so it was great to see the kids coming out into the yard and really coming alive when they heard. That day we had wonderful music from Rhythm Africana, and there was a wonderful singer called Kiru. Then I read poems, and so it was really brilliant. But later that afternoon, I remember we also went to Temple Street Hospital to celebrate 150 years of the hospital. And one of my most vivid memories with the van was that the staff within the hospital opened the windows so that the patients inside and the parents and the staff could hear the wonderful music and the poetry. So that was hugely uplifting and exhilarating. But Martin has mentioned that sometimes I have been also a poetry therapist for a festival in a van. And, you know, in my youth, I used to love going to tarot card sessions. So I thought, yeah, I can do that. I'm going to give that a go. And I really wanted, I think, for the sessions to be fun, to be natural, to be enjoyable. As Martin said, I mean, when you look at the book and you see it's poems of illness and healing, some people might think, oh, this is a bit, maybe this could be a bit grim. But no, it's a very uplifting collection of poems. So what I decided to do was people come in, I suppose, on a one-to-one basis. So it's intimate. It really is. I have never met these people before. They've never met me. So it's about kind of making a connection. So I thought, well, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to just bring it down a level because, for instance, last month I was in the Rotunda Hospital. And I really want to thank the communications team there, Kathy and Caro, and also Anne and Elizabeth, because everybody was so careful in choosing staff members. In that case, I spoke to staff members, choosing people who really would need a break from their very hectic schedule and come in and to have some downtime and relax and enjoy poetry. So usually I'd put on some music. And we have Emer here, who's a fantastic musician, but I put on some quiet music, and you should see the relief when they just come in and they sit down and, you know, they're away from their busy schedules. So the communications team, they're excellent. They chose a variety of staff members. There was the hospital librarian, there were administrators, there were nurses, there were doctors. You know, they were delighted to be there. So the music goes on, and then I usually lay the cards out on the table, kind of like this, face down. You can see the beautiful cards that Poetry Ireland made for me, because I had the privilege of choosing, say, 15 of the poems that I really love. And then I just asked people to really think about something in their life and then to choose a card. So for instance, if I turn this card over, it's Michael Hartnett's That Actor Kiss, which is one of my favorite poems. He goes in to see his father who's dying, and he kisses him. And then he says at the end, later over a drink, I realized that was our last kiss and alas, our first. So what happens when you do this as well with the cards? I have found that sometimes, you know, I ask people to close their eyes and listen to the music, and I might cheat a little and open my eye and just look, and they really are in a zone. And when, for instance, that poem, The Actor's Kiss, was picked by somebody, it was somebody whose father had just passed away. So unusual connections start to happen. Or Aoife Lyle has a beautiful poem about early motherhood. And I remember I was in the College of Surgeons as well on the 6th of January last year. I think it was the first actual vital signs poetry therapy session for Poetry Ireland. And a young mother had just come in, and when she picked the poem by Aoife Lyle, which is about young motherhood, she just left her little boy behind with the minder, and she was worried about leaving him there. So connections happen like that, which is absolutely wonderful. I just want to say, I know Emer and all of the artists involved, they know that it's really important to provide high quality art experiences for anybody who comes in as well. And I have to say, the poems in this anthology are exactly that. Seamus Heaney said, if poetry and the arts can do anything, they can fortify your inner life, your inwardness. And when I encounter people, when they come in the door for the poetry therapy sessions, I've been really struck by their sense of themselves, their curiosity about poetry, their willingness to open up, to share experiences with me. And so it's a very kind of humane, empathetic environment. And I might see about 10 people in maybe about 2.5 to 3 hours. At the end, I go home actually with a spring in my step. I'm really delighted to have encountered them and to have spoken to them and have shared the joy of poetry. So I want to thank Festival Van and thank Martin for editing and bringing together this amazing anthology. And thank you for listening, everyone.
Thanks so much, Enda. Wonderful. Really appreciate that. And there's lovely reflections and memories and insights there. which we'll return to, and no doubt after today as well, we'll return to those. It's a great pleasure to introduce to you now Emer Mayock.
Hi everyone. Yeah, thank you, Martin and Elizabeth, everybody at Festival in Cavan. And also it's been really brilliant to listen to Ger Walsh speak about her work, her amazing work. I haven't had the opportunity to meet Ger before, and I just love to hear the passion and her deep interest and knowledge of her work, and how she has welcomed Festival in Cavan into her world, which I think is absolutely brilliant. Also to Enda, who spoke so passionately about poetry and bringing it into all kinds of people's lives. I am a traditional musician and I've been playing music all my life. So as such, that has brought me into a lot of different situations of performing, collaboration, recording, composing. So I teach a lot of music. I've taught a lot of people of all ages, and traditional music is very intergenerational in Ireland. One day you can be playing with somebody who's 20 years younger than you, and the next day you're playing with somebody 20 years older than you, and maybe 40 years older than you, or whatnot. So I guess that the interaction with people of all ages is very natural to musicians in a way, because we're always put in those situations, and that's really nice. When I first got involved with Festival in Cavan, my experience has been absolutely undeniably positive, and I commend the professionalism of everybody involved. I think that has been said already today, and I completely concur with that, and I just want to voice that. And also the importance of the fact that that doesn't come easily, that doesn't just arrive, that is thought about, that's developed. And the care settings have been scoped with such knowledge and such awareness and empathy, so that when Festival in Cavan has arrived at a venue, in my experience, it's not an imposition to the residents and to the staff. It seems like everybody's really happy to receive it. And that has not always been the case in my experience of arriving in care settings. So I think that's one important thing that Festival in Cavan achieves from the outset, is that in bringing this, unusual spectacle to a setting, it has achieved it as if it was always kind of there. It was always there, wasn't it? And that's what I've felt about it. Mostly I've played to older residents in my experience with Festival in Cavan, and I suppose as such, I've performed solo, and then on the most recent tour I played with Donal Siggins, and so as an individual and also as collaborating with Donal, we would discuss, would it be really important to play melodies that are recognizable, and go back to some traditional Irish melodies that everybody knows. And so in one way we did that, and in another way we did the very opposite. And I think what the reasoning behind that for me was that I'm playing to people to respect them as an audience, to not define them for the setting they're in or the age they are or what they're now currently experiencing in their lives. And I also want that mutual relationship with them, that they listen to the music I am playing in the context that I'm playing it in. And I really value as an artist, as an individual, to be able to experience that as a musician is an absolute privilege. It's unpatronizing, it's a shared experience. And I had that in every setting I was in. I think that may be about 9 at this stage. I had a lovely experience last winter in Achill, and it was very, very beautiful. I know Achill very well. I'm from Mayo. I live here. I spent a lot of time in Achill, but I'd never been at the residency home where we went to, just on Achill Sound. And you arrive into these places and you're going, where's the van? Where is it? And so you have to find the van, because the van has often had to take the circuitous route to find the best place to to set up the show. And it was just a beautiful day, you know, firstly, weather-wise, because you're kind of thinking December in Achill, that's going to be really challenging. So the sun was shining and it was really a very warm day. There was something really special in the atmosphere. And I think that is created by Festival na Bhean uniquely, because one is always thinking, how is this going to work? You're outside, they're inside, in some of the settings, you know. One lovely setting recently in Roscommon actually was one of the residencies had a kind of a natural courtyard where all these double doors opened out from the building. A lot of the residents came outside. That was really beautiful. Can I just say, not to take up too much time, as an artist, I really have found the nature of the experience to be hugely enriching. It's made me think differently. It's made me think differently about my own way of expressing emotion and transmitting the music that I have in me. And it has made me think hugely differently about audience, the idea of audience. And the privilege of being able to interact with a completely different audience, and the enrichment of that. Also, the poetry and music element. I can't express how important I feel that is. And actually, in traditional music, you know, a lot of things kind of get sort of hurried up sometimes in performance situations, because you have to do this and then you have to do that, or, you know, even in informal situations, the voice of the poet kind of fell to the side sometimes, because of the environment of noise, and everybody just wants to just hear fast tunes. So Festival na Bhean offer this really beautiful symbiotic relationship between the poet and the musician, you know, and that listening, that wonderful ability to listen amidst all the noise in our world. It invites us to listen to each other, and I can't commend my experiences enough, and I want to thank you all. And I hope I haven't overstepped the time mark. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Emer. I'm struck there listening to you and not wanting to interrupt you, despite the fact that it's my responsibility to curtail after 5 minutes or so. Just how compelling your ideas are, and where you're coming from in terms of the depth of experience, the depth of tradition and performance and writing, your artistic perspective, and how for you personally that's very much part of a social perspective, maybe in particular in what you're saying in terms of your relationship with an audience, with the person receiving the music. But I suppose I get a sense that the Festival na Bhean experience has excited a different kind of social sense of what it means to be a musician and what it means to perform. I know that everybody listening, everyone present, will be glad that I didn't interrupt you, and I can't help but be reminded of what it's like to hear you perform live, which I had the privilege of course, of being there and watching these very special performances unfold. And you're suggesting to us the way in which the Festival na Bhean work can bring things out of us. It maybe cause a musician or a poet to raise their game, and that's part of the dialogue with each other. It's part of the moment. It's part, as you've said, part of the sense of a privilege of being authentically connected with an audience that you might not otherwise have reached. And then in another sense, what you're observing is what's been brought out of the people who are residents in these individual environments. And I think that connects back very meaningfully with what Ger said to us a little bit earlier, herself as an advocate, as a mental health professional, aware that in the vulnerable journey of recovery, there is, despite the ups and downs, always under the surface, a latent hope that things will improve, that a person can get, as it were, back on their feet, begin to experiment with social possibilities. And that under the surface sense of oneself and the possibility of recovery is, of course, layered in with that sense of dignity of what society owes to the vulnerable person, what society owes to the recipient of care within our healthcare system. And Ger has, I think, given us a very strong sense of ways in which patients in the mental health setting can find themselves feeling more sociable, that they can find themselves stimulated with respect to their conversations with their carers, with staff members, maybe with their doctors, etc., as regards what their next steps might be. And I think Ger gave us a lovely sense of the ways in which the Vital Signs Festival in Navan performances excited a sense of what it means to attend a concert. So the sense of a memory of things that used to be done, that used to be normal, maybe when a person had was in better health, maybe, or had more agency or more opportunities. I think there's a lovely sense of parallel between what you've said, Emer, and what you've said, Ger. And you too, Enda, gave us a lovely impression of that direct encounter with the healthcare professional, and what comes out of them when they go into that private place and they play with this concept of the poetry therapist, and they they turn to their own kind of expressive ability to reflect, but also to respond to the artwork on the page. And it's through the medium of conversation with yourself, and you presented that to us in such an interesting fashion. I know many people would be very, very keen to hear more of that work. You're putting yourself there on a very particular intersection, and that art therapy, a poetry therapy function, for all that you approach it in some ways ironically, and you are offering something that parallels the mainstream service or services, if you will. And that's one thing for me that was very memorable. Is the idea that we were not really on a mission to as healers on this tour, and we were there to have an opportunity to recognize what is a community of care. And I think Ger has been a brilliant voice for a particular community of care today. And I think Enda and Emer, you have been brilliant voices for what it means to recognize a community of care, to recognize your own stake in it, and to recognize potentially what kind of contribution you might make. But it is, of course, innately collective at the end of the day, in terms of the collaboration that goes into it, and in terms of that exquisite synergy between the audience and the performer. Can I ask you, Ger, briefly, and I will ask again also anyone who's present to pop in a question, does that strike a chord with you, what Emer said, in terms of her sense of her audience and her sense of the privilege of getting to engage sometimes with vulnerable people or with the underserved audience, where you're coming from a mental health perspective? And I will also remark finally, I'm really intrigued by that sense of a meeting of minds between yourself and Emer, although you haven't met yet at this stage. But are you struck by what she has said on the basis of what you've said to us, with the authenticity that has come from the performers that you've met?
Absolutely. Without a doubt, I suppose music is universal, and it just transports us away, and it absolutely has been an amazing experience to interact. That full concert experience, it just transported us, and that in the care setting of dementia, it evoked that memory of where was I and what was I doing when I was last at a concert. So that lovely reminiscence of that memory. Like music is so universal. It's just so mindful. It's a mood enhancer. It's, it really involves everybody. It's that shared space.
I have to say, as we come close to concluding, that really strikes a chord with me from the editors, and then from another artistic perspective, the way in which the performances were a reminder of the power of art, the power of music, and the power of poetry. Their communicative capacity was writ large across the whole tour. We've had a question in through the chat from Lily, who's wondering, is there any chance of Vital Signs going on the road again to reach those parts of the country that they didn't get to the first time? I think there's every chance of that. But of course, Festival in Navan are working constantly. It's not just the Vital Signs project that we're spotlighting today and exploring. So do watch the Festival in Navan website and watch their social media as well. We have a comment from Finola, who's said that the session has been wonderfully engaging from her perspective, and to remind us all that poetry and music are such powerful but maybe silent healing activities. So we're I suppose hopefully combating a little bit of the silence there and trying to articulate some of those subtler dimensions here together in this session. And Finola is saying that she once came across a quote that is, "Reading is to the mind what exercise is to the body. Connection and communication is the essence for positive living." Thanks very much, Finola. We really appreciate that. I'm going to hand you back with warm thanks again to Emer Mayock and to Ger Walsh and to Enda Wyley and to Festival in Navan too. Going to hand you back to Anne, I believe, and Anne Hendrick of Festival in Navan, who we've mentioned and has been our leader and our inspirer and our unflagging facilitator in all of this work. Anne, thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Martin. I'm probably going to reiterate a couple of things that Elizabeth said, but basically on behalf of myself and Elizabeth, I do want to thank again the Arts Council, all of the arts officers, the librarians, the Creative Ireland coordinators, everyone at Poetry Ireland, our poets and musicians, but most especially Ger Walsh, everyone at Mental Health Ireland, and all the activities coordinators around the country who helped us make the tour happen. As we said, Festival in Navan's core goal is to bring the arts to marginalised communities who might otherwise not have access. And as we all know, loneliness is a huge issue for vulnerable and older people. And it can be very hard to measure the impact of work like this, especially for all the reports that are due down the line for myself and Elizabeth. A very wise former colleague of mine often referred to Simone Weil's quote, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." And I do use this as a guide for much of the work I do with Festival in Navan. We are very lucky to have recorded some very moving interactions between our artists and audiences over the past few months. And we could certainly share anecdotes for another hour if we had to. But I do want to speak on behalf of our audiences and acknowledge their very, very generous participation in all of our events. We've had encounters with very feisty women in their 90s who have reminded us that they love poetry, not loved past tense. Some fashion icons, one in particular who was chased through the town by a parish priest because of a very short miniskirt that had been sourced from London. A man who knew Patrick Cavan in his youth and shared some very bawdy stories that included Brendan Behan. And then lots of quiet encounters where our audiences shared very personal experiences with our artists, which meant a lot to both. It encourages us all to meet a person where they are and in that moment, and to slightly misquote Walt Whitman, it was a stark reminder that people are large and they contain multitudes. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone. It really meant a lot to us. The tour is immeasurable, but very, very meaningful. So thank you everyone for taking the time to chat with us today.